The sun was sinking behind the rust-colored hills when he rode in, a lone figure on a black horse, dust swirling around his boots, his jaw set like stone, eyes colder than the steel in his holster. His name was Colt Warren, a man carved out of hardship and revenge, raised by the desert, scarred by betrayal, and driven by one purpose, to take back the land that was stolen from his family. The Warren Ranch had once stretched as far as the eye could see until Ethan McCall, a shrewd, cunning rancher, took it all through forged papers and hired guns. Colt had spent years building himself up, gathering money, men, and power until he could return, not as the poor boy they'd thrown out, but as the man who now owned the bank that held the McCall deeds. That evening, as he dismounted in front of the weather-beaten porch of the McCall Ranch, the old man came limping out, leaning on a cane, his face pale as he recognized the rider. "Colt Warren," he rasped, guilt flickering through his eyes. "You shouldn't have come back." Colt took off his hat, his voice low but sharp as a whip. "I'm not here to talk, McCall. I'm here to take what's mine." Inside the house, soft footsteps echoed, the sound of a woman descending the staircase, her skirt brushing against the worn banister, her golden hair catching the light of the dying sun. Her name was Clara McCall, the rancher's only daughter, and when her eyes met Colt's, something unseen sparked, anger, fear, curiosity, maybe even recognition of a kindred pain. She'd heard of him, the outlaw turned land baron, the man whose heart had turned to stone. But what she saw standing in her doorway wasn't a monster. It was a man carrying the weight of too many yesterdays. "You'll take my father's land," she said, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "Yes," Colt replied simply. "The papers are signed. He's lost everything." The old man collapsed into a chair, defeated, but Clara stepped forward, her chin raised high despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "And what about me?" she asked softly. Colt frowned. "You'll leave with him. I have no quarrel with you." But as he turned away, her voice broke through the twilight, trembling yet firm. "Wait, if you take this land, he'll die. You want vengeance? Fine. Take me instead. Just spare him." The words struck him harder than any bullet ever had. He froze, his breath caught between disbelief and a buried ache he thought long dead. "You don't know what you're saying," he muttered. But she stepped closer, eyes burning with desperate courage. "I do. I can't let him suffer for mistakes I wasn't even born to see. You want payment. Let me be it." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the chirping of crickets and the creak of the old porch beneath their boots. Colt looked at her then, really looked, at the dirt smudge on her cheek, the torn hem of her dress, the way she stood like she'd been holding the world together for too long. Something twisted inside him, a storm he couldn't name. He'd come to destroy, not to feel. He'd promised himself no mercy, no softness. But Clara's voice, trembling with love and loyalty for a father who'd wronged another man's family, broke something open in him that had been locked away since childhood. "I don't want you," he said finally, forcing the words out like poison. "Then take my promise," she whispered. "I'll work the ranch, serve you, do whatever you ask. Just let him keep his home. Please." He turned away, gripping his reins, trying to summon the anger that had carried him through every sleepless night, but all he could hear was her plea, soft as wind but sharp as a blade. "Please, Colt." His name on her lips did something to him, something he couldn't fight. He mounted his horse and looked back once, his shadow long. Across the yard. "You've bought him a week," he said coldly. "1 week to find another place. After that, it's mine." Her shoulders sagged, but she nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. As he rode away into the fading dusk, he told himself he'd done the right thing, that mercy was weakness, and weakness had cost his family everything. But miles later, as the wind howled through the canyon and the stars blinked awake, her voice haunted him, echoing in every corner of his mind. Meanwhile, Clara stood alone on the porch, watching the man who had come to destroy her life ride away, feeling something inside her shift like the first crack in a dam. She hated him, she told herself. She hated what he'd done. But when she closed her eyes, she saw not a villain, but a man in pain. Over the next few days, she worked harder than ever, helping her father pack what little they could, caring for the cattle, patching fences, refusing to let despair win. Yet every night, she'd glance toward the horizon where he'd vanished, wondering if he'd truly returned to finish what he started, or if the look in his eyes that night had meant something more. And far away, Colt Warren couldn't sleep. The fire burned low, his men laughing in the distance, but he sat alone, staring at the deeds that had cost him his soul. For the first time in years, revenge didn't taste like victory, it tasted like ash. He remembered her voice, the way her lips had trembled when she'd said, "Just spare him." He told himself it was weakness, but deep down, he knew it was something else, something dangerous. Something like longing. The next morning, he saddled up before dawn, telling himself he was only checking the boundaries of his new land. But when he crested the ridge and saw her in the fields below, hair loose, hands steady as she mended a broken fence post, the sight stole his breath. She turned, sensing his gaze, and their eyes met across the wind. No words passed between them, but in that silent moment, both knew that something had changed. The land that once divided them was now the thin line between vengeance and love. And though neither would admit it, their hearts had already begun to cross it. The dawn came soft and gold over the plains, the kind of morning that tried to heal what night had broken, but for Colt Warren, peace was something that didn't come easy. He sat on his horse at the edge of the McCall property, watching Clara move through the corral with quiet grace, her braid swinging, her hands steady even as her heart carried the weight of her father's fate. He told himself he'd just come to make sure they were leaving, to see with his own eyes that his plan was moving forward. But as the wind carried the faint hum of her voice, a tune old and aching like the land itself, something inside him wavered. He dismounted, boots crunching the dry soil, and she turned sharply, her eyes wide with surprise and something else, something she couldn't name. "You came back," she whispered, almost accusingly. "You said we had a week." He removed his hat, his voice low. "And I meant it, but I ain't here for the land today." Her brows furrowed, suspicion mingling with confusion. "Then why?" He didn't answer at first. He just looked at her, at the smudge of dust on her cheek, at the determination in her stance, at the sadness behind her strength. Finally, he said, "Because I wanted to see if you'd really keep fightin' for a man who took everything from mine." Her jaw trembled, but her voice held steady. "He's my father. Whatever he's done, I can't stop loving him." Colt nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "That kind of love, it's rare. Dangerous, even." She stepped closer, her heart pounding as she asked, "And what kind of love did you ever have, Colt Warren, that made you turn so cold?" He didn't answer, couldn't, because her words hit too close to the truth. Once, long ago, before the fire and the debt, before his father drank himself to death and his mother wept herself into the grave, Colt had known love, the love of land, of home, of family. Ethan McCall had taken all of that with the stroke of a pen. Colt's jaw tightened, but when he looked at Clara, the hate that used to burn in him felt hollow. "You should go," he muttered, turning away. But Clara caught his arm, her voice trembling. "You think destroying us will bring your family back? You think pain heals pain?" Her words sliced through him like a blade through silk. He looked down at her hand, small and warm against his sleeve, and something cracked deep within him. "No," he said hoarsely. "But it's all I've known." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that carried truths neither wanted to face. In the distance, thunder rolled, low and threatening. "Then maybe," Clara whispered, "you could learn something else." She didn't mean for her hand to stay there, but it did. And for a heartbeat, he let it. Then, as if burned, he stepped back, anger warring with something gentler. "You don't understand me," he said. "You don't want to." But her eyes softened, and she replied, "Maybe I do." That night, the storm broke. Rain came hard, drumming the tin roof, flooding the riverbeds, turning the roads to rivers of mud. Ethan McCall's cough had worsened, and Clara worked by candlelight, trying to keep the fire burning, trying to keep her father alive. When the door burst open and Colt strode in, soaked through and grim-faced, she thought she was dreaming. "The creek's rising," he said. "The barn'll go under. The cattle, let them go," she said sharply, wiping sweat from her brow. "I don't care about cattle right now." Colt stared at the trembling girl, her hair plastered to her face, her hands raw from tending to her father. "You'll lose everything," he said, voice rough. She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Then I'll still have him. That's all that matters." And in that moment, Colt understood something he never had before. All his life, he'd been fighting for land, for things he could touch and own. But what she was fighting for was love, something he'd forgotten how to believe in. Without another word, he threw his coat over her shoulders and moved to help her. Together they worked through the storm, saving what they could, guiding the horses to higher ground, dragging the feed barrels, their hands brushing in the dark, the thunder shaking the heavens. When at last the storm passed and dawn broke over the soaked fields, they stood side by side, drenched and exhausted. Clara turned to him, her lips trembling. "Why did you help us?" He met her gaze, rainwater running down his face. "Maybe because I finally remembered what it's like to be human." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Then spare him, Colt. Spare us both." And this time, he didn't have it in him to say no. He walked back to his horse, reached into his coat, and pulled out the deed, the one piece of paper that could end everything. "Take it," he said, handing it to her. "It's yours again." She blinked, unable to believe. "You mean?" "I mean I don't want it anymore. The land, the fight, the past, it ain't worth what it's cost me." She took the paper with shaking hands, tears falling freely now. "Why?" she whispered. He smiled faintly, weary and soft. "Because someone once told me pain doesn't heal pain." For a long moment, they stood there, silent except for the wind rustling the wet grass. Then she stepped forward and, before she could stop herself, threw her arms around him. He froze, then slowly, cautiously, held her. It wasn't a lover's embrace yet, just two souls finding peace in the ruins of old wounds. Ethan McCall passed quietly a week later, his daughter's hand in his, forgiveness on his lips. Colt came to the funeral, standing back beneath a cottonwood tree, hat in hand, watching the woman who had changed everything. When the service ended, Clara walked to him, her black dress fluttering in the wind. "You came," she said softly. "Didn't think I should," he admitted. "But I owed him that. And you don't owe me anything," she said. "You gave me back my home." He looked into her eyes, the sun catching the tears there. "Home," he said slowly, "ain't just land, Clara. Maybe it's where you stop running." She smiled through her grief. "Then stay," she whispered. "Stay and stop running." For a long moment, he didn't move, the ghost of his past whispering in his ear, telling him to leave, to keep his heart locked tight. But then he looked at her, really looked, and knew that this was the one place left where he could finally belong. So he nodded once, a small, broken smile on his lips. "All right," he said, "I'll stay." And as they stood together under that wide, endless sky, the wind carrying the scent of rain and earth and new beginnings, Colt Warren realized that the girl who had once offered herself to save her father had unknowingly saved him too. The land was still scarred, the fences broken, but the promise of healing had taken root. In time, they rebuilt the ranch together, not out of ownership or vengeance, but out of love, a love born from mercy, from forgiveness, from a single whispered plea on a night long past. And sometimes, when the evening light turned gold and the wind swept across the hills, Clara would rest her head on his shoulder, and he'd whisper, "You spared me too." The camera of the story would fade out there, on two figures standing where hate had once ruled, now wrapped in a peace neither thought they'd ever find. So if you're listening, remember this, sometimes the greatest strength isn't in taking back what was stolen, it's in forgiving what can't be undone. And if this story touched your heart, Make sure to subscribe for more tales of love, loss, and redemption from the old wild heart of the West. Because every story deserves its ending, and every heart deserves its home.